Hello, welcome back to the Holistic Inner Balance podcast. We have a really fun episode for you today where we might call out some things. There might be a couple points where you're like, oh, I might be doing that. It's it's all in good faith. But we're going to be talking about psychobabble, which we'll tell you a little bit more about what that is, but how we maybe have used psychological terms in ways that might not be the most helpful for us.
Yeah, we are talking with Joe Nucci, and he is an expert breaking down how people talk about mental health. He is a psychotherapist, and his mission is to correct widely misused terms. He adds valuable nuance and explains complex ideas in ways that anyone can understand. He's kind of a big deal, y'all. His social media reached over 10 million people in the first 6 months of posting content. And his book just came out September 2025. It's called Psychobabble. And it dives deep into a bunch of myths and how health information is so confusing to navigate and how we can more easily understand different perspectives about mental health. And you're going to learn in this conversation, are you have you dated narcissists? Are you a highly sensitive person? Are you an empath? Or is this a bunch of psychobabble? Find out with us. It's going to be great. I'm Dr. Nicole Kane, and this is Hadley, and we
Hello.
Hi.
love we love holistic healing. And so thanks for being here.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me.
So
Yeah.
I figure let's go out the gate, and can you talk to us about what psychobabble is and why we're talking about mental health wrong?
Yeah. So psychobabble is a term for when we use like mental health or psychological jargon to make a point. And specifically, it's when we're not exactly resting on any sort of like authority or accuracy, but we're hoping that the authority of the field, because psychology, purports to know something, unique or special or true about the human condition, as a way to make that argument. I think in its most broadest definition, it still counts as psychobabble, no matter what it is that you're using psychology to talk about. But what I talk about in my book is really the misuse of a lot of the different therapy terms that are just so common nowadays. They just weren't
Yeah.
that common 5, 10 years ago, and the corresponding concepts. So people may not be, using the term gaslighting, but sometimes people will talk about, their subjective reality as it's, somehow moral, that this must be respected and no one can have any nuance or disagreement. And I think that counts as psychobabble too, because it's coming from the term and the conversation around gaslighting or emotional abuse or something like that.
I know this is so up your alley, Hads. Like
Yeah,
yeah,
I love
you're
this.
like bursting, and so I want to hand this glorious nugget that he just dropped over to you.
Yeah. Well, I see this happening all the time and I'm like, this is not the way that you're supposed to use that word. Like, this isn't actually helping you and it's
Right.
not helping anyone else in your life. And it just like bothers me to no end. So I like am very excited about your
Yeah.
work.
Thank you so much. Well, that's exactly what I tell people. Sometimes I think people get this impression that it's like a finger wagging like ivory tower. Like that's not the exact operational definition of whatever, piece of jargon or term, but it's no, it's not just that you're misusing it. It's you're misusing it in a way that it seems like it's hurting your mental health. It's hurting your relationships. And that's not what I would say, 99.9% of therapists had in mind when we started putting all this information out there on social media or on blogs or on whatever it is. And so I'm kind of curious, like, Hadley, is it something happened that like in your life or like, is it just something that you see all the time like I do?
Yeah, it's mostly like on Instagram and stuff. Though I will hear people talk about it in, like the idea of like, oh, everyone's ex is a narcissist, like
Hmm.
that's a very classic one. Or everyone's mom is a narcissist. I see
Right.
that all the time too, where I'm like, wait a minute, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Is that true? Is
Oh.
that really true? Like there aren't that many narcissists in the world
Right.
that
Totally.
everyone's mom is a narcissist, right?
Yeah. Should we dive into that one? Because I feel
Yes,
like
let's
that's
do it.
definitely so. What's so funny about this myth, I think it's myth 17 in the book. Don't quote me on the number. But when I was writing the book and when I was getting ready for it to come out, people would ask, they'd be like, oh, well, what are some of the myths that you talk about? And I would say, myth number 17, your ex is definitely a narcissist. And everyone had the same reaction. Ready? This was it. It was, oh my gosh, that's so overused. Like it's so like harmful to survivors. I'm like, oh my gosh, I know. And then they would go, but my ex? And what's and I say this with humor because I also feel that way. Like, you know what I mean? If you kind of take the broad psychobabble version of narcissism, I'm like, no, but me too. Like me too. But it's like we can't all have that experience. It's just, I mean, otherwise, the narcissists are definitely just getting all of the ladies and all of the men and everyone. And then I think maybe it's like I really like a lot of Dr. Ramani's content. I talk a little bit about her in the book, but sometimes, like her book that came out is called It's Not You. And it's like, well, if this is the only type of person you've dated across multiple relationships, like maybe there's an opportunity to look inward here. And I
Mm.
don't actually think that is often the culprit here. I think that what's happening is like let's say like Hadley, I'll just pick you. Let's say you and I are dating, and for a while like you're just like my perfect angel. Like I would change myself for you. You know what I mean? I would give you anything you wanted. How could I deny thee? And then when the relationship goes stale, when it starts to die on the vine, or when a breakup ensues, the contrast where it's like now I'm going to prioritize myself is going to feel very selfish in comparison because it is in a lot of ways. In the book, I also write about how, when we're stressed, there's kind of two general types of coping strategies. There's an insecure style of coping, and there's a grandiose style of coping. So, insecure is something like, oh, I messed this up. I'm never going to be with someone like that ever again. Like, I'm just going to be single. Like, I'm not worth it. But the grandiose is a little bit more like, don't they know who I, don't they know who I am? Like, don't they know how lucky they are? And I think we've all had moments where we had those different thoughts, and some of us maybe have, better impulse control than others, and some of us have said those to our partner. And breakups are really tough. Like it's painful, right? Like we know it's like the same pain receptors in your brain as physical pain. Like people are gonna act out, and so my whole thing is let's give ourselves and our exes a little bit of grace. And if we're going to normalize conversations about narcissism, let's talk about how a lot of psychologists think it's not necessarily a negative trait. It can actually have some adaptive qualities depending on who you are or what your job is.
Oh, that
Ooh, tell
probably
us more
blew.
about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, blue minds there, I'm sure. Yeah.
Well, something that I've been talking a lot more lately as I've talked more about the book, and it's something I'd like to create more content about. So please tell me what you think about this because it's still something I'm wrestling with. I don't think that the mental health field talks enough about how a lot of what we consider like dysfunction or disordered behavior thinking, it really comes down to like whether or not you're a fit with your context. So the context being your relationship, your family, your culture. So to use myself as an example, I'm, an open-minded person, and I'm someone that likes seeing all sides of everything. And so being a therapist in New York City, like that's great. Like the city is full of so much variety and different perspectives. And of course, a big part of being a therapist is looking at stuff from every single angle. If you put me in a time or even in a culture in a country that's around today, that has different norms and different laws, those natural instincts that I have to be open-minded, to be someone who's very curious, that might not just be like a liability, like that could be actually like very like dangerous, and
Mm.
it's because I'm not necessarily like a fit with that environment. And so you apply that to somebody's relationship, they're not always, their personality is not always a good fit, or their family system, or whatever it might be. So bringing it back to something like narcissism, one of the things that people complain about when it comes to narcissists is they tend to be superior, and they tend to have some deficits in empathy. Well, when I think about like a surgeon, someone who cuts into other people for a living, I don't want them to have zero empathy, but I don't want them to be like a bleeding heart, like therapist. You know what I mean? I mean, they're literally cutting me open. They're like, maybe I'm having brain surgery. From what I know about brain surgeons, they tend to be a bit superior. They tend to have a bit of a God complex. And you know what? There's a saying, well, it's not brain surgery, right? To like refer to how easy something is. I kind of want you to feel a little superior. Now, I don't want this to be an overcompensation for lack of skill, or a lack of ability. But I think that sometimes, we romanticize a certain type of person, like the CEO. It's like, oh, I want to date the CEO. Actually, I once had a conversation with a girl like this. She lives in the Bay Area, and she wanted to date the hot shot, tech startup founder, and he was always canceling on her. He was because his priority is his startup. Like he has investors to answer to, and so, I think people have to also be honest with themselves. Like, well, what is it that you want in a relationship? And if what you want is traits that we sometimes associate with narcissism, like success, prestige, charisma, there might be a little bit of a trade-off there. And I go against the grain a little bit. Some, other content creators or people that speak out on this topic are very fond of saying, like, oh, well, yeah, maybe they do good things in society or in life, but I would never ever date one. And I think that depends on the kind of relationship that you're looking for. Some people out there, maybe they want like a partner in crime for their ambitions or whatever they're after in life. And I think that's okay.
I
Mm.
love that language, how you fit in the context of the environment. And like you said, it's a positive adaptation to have some narcissistic traits where there's a lot of grandiosity or confidence that comes with that I'm okay cutting a person open and watching them bleed. And, it's okay. It's
Right.
actually what you want in that context. And so you're kind of bringing some nuance into the conversation of maybe it's not that they're a problem, it's that it's not the right match for what the environment is or what you want.
Mhm. Absolutely. And when I talk about, an individual context fit and I talk about a mismatch, I'm usually thinking of something a little bit more severe than um, your feelings are sometimes hurt when they, advocate for whatever it is. So another example could be people talk about like moral narcissism. And I'm not, here to say, any kind of a political stripe or political viewpoint is right or wrong. I'm just noticing that people that are really active in that worlds and those are the roles they serve in society, they tend to be pretty self-righteous about their beliefs. And I'm not going to sit here and say like, well, that's inherently unhealthy, that's inherently bad, even if it is driven from a place of ego, even if they're getting a lot from it. Like again, like I don't want it to be an overcompensation for something. I don't want them to have zero empathy. Like we all want to have, flexibility. The other thing that's kind of interesting about the narcissism conversation too is that when I was studying, narcissistic, related content or survivors of narcissistic abuse, I noticed that everyone does something very interesting. They talk about how they say, "Well, I'm not talking about the personality disorder." Because I would never diagnose someone from afar and I would never, I'm just talking about this personality trait. But then they describe the personality trait like it's fixed and rigid and pervasive in all contexts. But that's the definition of the disorder, is they're not able to have any flexibility. And I would say that, like, again, I actually think a lot more people than they would care to admit are actually very attracted to narcissistic traits, provided that the person can tap into their empathy, that the person can actually share a life with their partner and there's give and take. Like, provided that they can do those things, it's when we don't have those things that narcissism becomes an issue. And that's actually the definition of the disorder. So sometimes I feel like people on the internet, they want to have their cake and eat it too. You know what I mean? And I don't think they're allowed to do that. And that's one of the reasons why I've called them out a little bit.
I like that you're calling it out because I was going to ask. I feel like you just answered the question. Is when is narcissism or narcissistic traits? When is that a problem? Especially pathogenomic to that condition is that for many of those individuals, it's not a problem. I'm happy with
Right.
this. It's those that are around them.
Totally.
Mm.
Yeah. And I think there's also a little bit of a differential diagnosis we got to do, right? Like, is the teenaged girl a narcissist or is she immature? You know, is
Mhm.
the person going through a breakup? Are they like protecting themselves? Like
Mhm.
they're viewing their ex and maybe not the most favorable of terms and saying bad things about them. Is that from, a place of narcissism or from a place of like hurt? I think that I'm personally a fan of kind of like a lot of developmental models. And so I often view a lot of what we see as emotional immaturity as incredibly narcissistic in a lot of ways, whether that's the grandiose type of narcissism or even like the more vulnerable type of narcissism where it's like, well, poor me, I'm the victim. Um, and kind of like I said, if your whole life, if your whole passion is about talking about narcissists and how everyone is one and how they've always wronged you, like I have questions, I have questions. Maybe you fit the vulnerable narcissistic, you know, um, subtype, and maybe that's okay to talk about and to talk to your therapist about and figure out some skills and tools to develop out of that.
Oof. What's coming up for me is the opposite in many ways, is somebody who isn't empathetic and they have those narcissistic traits, and then this whole group of people that identify as I'm an empath or I'm a highly sensitive
Mm,
person. Can you talk about that?
yeah. So here's the question I like to ask people, and I have to admit, I don't think I phrase it precisely this way in the book on my chapter on empaths, but it's worth sharing. Have you ever met an empath, a self-described empath, who would go to like a dance party, let's say, completely sober, and they just leave being like, "Oh my God, I'm just feeling so much positive emotion. I'm just drunk on it. Like I'm such an empath." You never hear them talk about positive emotion, which I think is
Mm.
so interesting because I actually think a lot of self-described empaths are probably hypervigilant. They probably are dealing with some sort of trauma response or maybe like a PTSD diagnosis. And it's very common in PTSD for people to be hypervigilant for danger, for emotional danger, especially if they're survivors of, emotional abuse or a lot of emotional difficulty, whether in a past relationship or growing up. And what we mean by hypervigilance, for those who are listening and watching who aren't aware of it, like we're all, on the lookout for danger. Like there's kind of like a baseline awareness that we all have. Hypervigilance, the key word being hyper, is that you're seeing it when it's not there, or when there's an
Mhm.
ambiguous comment, you're automatically assuming the worst. That's what hypervigilance is. So you could compare it to a soldier who comes home from war and there's a loud noise and they automatically assume it's gunfire or a bomb. I live in New York City. There's loud noises all the time. In fact, I hope the one happening outside my window is not coming through on the microphone. Um, and so again, this is another great example of that, individual context fit. A really fun fact that I love is one of the populations with the lowest rates of PTSD. Can you guess who it is? It's a country.
Oh.
Japan.
No, Israel. Why? Because, current events aside, I don't want to touch that, but it's more like they're always at war. Like there's always stuff going on. Everyone has to serve in the IDF. And so what does that mean? It means that when there's loud noises, that's an adaptive response. It's not hypervigilance. It's like you got to be vigilant if you got to run to like the bomb shelter or like whatever, right? And
Mhm.
everyone is going through the experience too. So it's not a mismatch with anyone like you're dating or the relationships or stuff like that. And
Mhm.
so I remember when I learned that, I mean, I thought about that for a while. I was like, whoa, like this is definitely not
Mhm.
talked about enough,
Mhm.
And so I think that I see it a lot in like more spiritual communities. People are like, well, I'm an empath. I'm an empath. And unfortunately, some of those people have found their way to me in my practice. And we have to talk where it's like, well, maybe this isn't, like a gift. Maybe this isn't an inherent trait. Maybe we can actually learn to kind of soothe your nervous system. And you're not going to be picking up on potential, negative emotion all the time. Because let me tell you, I do know, I think a few genuine empaths, and they get really happy around happy people. Like they are very like, but I often find that people that are like that don't necessarily like wear it like they're like a superhero or something because they're aware of the other side of it, which is where it can be exhausting, right? To be around
Yeah.
people. And so,
Oh, that's yeah, when you described the like getting drunk off of the positive emotions, I'm like, that's me. I don't drink, so when I go to like weddings and stuff, I just get drunk off of
hmm
other people's drunk
yeah.
energy. I'm like, "Oh, yeah." But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't super like call myself an empath. So that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hadley, I have a question for you. So when you see other people, I feel like you're really good at kind of mirroring them and you pick up on it. Do you ever experience that with inanimate objects?
Ooh, interesting.
There's a
Um,
method to the madness of the question, I promise.
I feel like when I was a kid, I did a lot with animals.
like stuffed animals and like,
Oh, yes.
yeah,
yes, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Dolls and
interesting.
stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
So
For sure.
there's this neurological condition where
Are you about to
people,
diagnose me?
I don't think you satisfy the criteria, but I kind of wish you would have answered differently. There's
Oh,
this author, Joe, do you know Oliver Sacks's work?
He sounds familiar, but I don't off the top of my head.
He wrote this book called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat.
Oh, I have read excerpts
mm.
of this. It's been many
Yeah,
years, but yes.
yeah, that was, I feel like, quite, his work was like mind blowing for me when I went to counseling school, and I was like, whoa. And so from his work, there's all this interesting research about mirror neurons, where
Mm,
people who have abundance of these mirror neurons, they can feel happy when other people are feeling happy. They can feel sad. Maybe if someone has a headache, they can get a headache. But these individuals, on extreme cases, also can have empathy with inanimate objects. And one case that I remember reading about is this woman looked at a lamppost and she started feeling like she was taller and thinner and stronger and more narrow. And so it's like when we think about, I'm just kind of noodling over, Joe, what you're saying is, what is this an adaptation to? What is this telling me about this
mm,
person's
yeah.
neuroscience, their behaviors, their family? And Hadlee, you may not become a lamppost, but the stuffies gotcha.
Yeah, it was more like things with like faces and stuff as a kid,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
not, yeah, I'm not gonna look at a lamppost and
Yeah.
And become the lamppost.
yeah.
Yeah. Are
Interesting.
you well, here's a question for you because I've thought a lot about this. Before I went and did my clinical training, I took some personality measures and on the five factor model of personality, so like the big five, I remember scoring quite low in neuroticism, which like sensitivity to negative
Mm.
emotion. And I feel like if I were to take it again, if I could take it again, I'm probably too familiar with like the measure at this point, but I think it would actually be higher because I think something that clinical training helped me do is just like attune better, of course, to
Yeah.
sensitivity to negative emotion. And I'm wondering, do you think it's and it might not just be one or the other because on one hand I'm like, well, maybe, I mean, I've always been like a sensitive and compassionate guy, and so maybe it was more just about like learning to name those feelings, like observe those feelings, and just kind of like get really attuned to the skill set that was already there. Or do you think like over time can people get more mirror neurons? Does that question make sense?
It does. And I think about the incredible adaptation capability the brain has. Like we have all
Right.
this neuroplasticity, so people can develop skills and traits, and then the way that we wire it is the way we'll fire it. And so I'm thinking about,
Mm-hmm.
as you develop yourself as a clinician, that's an adaptation that you're intentionally neuroplastically wiring. And then I think about, here's the other nerdy thing, which this is your podcast, so I don't want to go off too much on a rabbit hole, but when we feel a certain way, and so sometimes we fake it till we make it, right? So I'm going to feel a certain way, and that can cause a domino of effects that change the composition of your gut microbiome. And then the gut microbiome is going to respond to the neurotransmitters, your endocrine system, your immune system, and it's going to maintain and re-equilibrate that adaptive feedback loop. So, all of that
Mm-hmm.
being said, I think absolutely.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's interesting to think about these things in the extremes because in a way, while it maybe comes at a cost, like I feel more sensitive to negative emotion now, I do feel more self-aware and aware of others now,
Yeah.
having put in that work. Because even though really low trait neuroticism, I guess it's associated with like less risk for certain mental health conditions, and
Yeah.
there are some good things about it. But I think one of the bad things, it's like I was just kind of like unaware, like if someone like insulted me, like it kind of like went over my head in some ways, you know what
Yeah.
I mean? And so I think there's kind of a give and take to it.
Yeah. Would
Mm.
you, if you were in the Matrix and you could choose between taking the pill that you know you're in the Matrix, or taking the pill to stay in the Matrix? Like, be honest with me.
Mm.
Everyone wants to take the pill to have the
Yeah,
knowing.
right.
But what would you choose?
I guess it would depend on my position in society in the Matrix at the time.
Ooh.
Um,
That
but
is a good answer. Yeah.
Because I think depending on where I'm situated, it may be a little bit more difficult to answer.
Yeah.
But I think in general, I would like to think that I would want to be aware I'm in the matrix. And part of that is just because sometimes, I mean, I've only been in like content creation for a few years, but I really do feel like, um I thought I was media aware before
Yeah.
working in it.
Mm,
And so much of our world is facilitated through the media these days that sometimes it is an opportunity to practice patience with friends and loved ones who don't work in it.
Yeah.
yeah.
Because there's sometimes it does feel a little bit like the Matrix or Matrix Light, maybe I would
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. Because you were talking about in some of the content that I was reading is I called it intern syndrome, but it's like the
Mm,
more that we learn this language, the more that we learn about this world, the more we can start to diagnose ourselves or identify as
Or
these certain things. So like
other people.
yeah, when I was in graduate school, I had bipolar, I had ADHD, I had anxiety, I had depression,
right.
I had dependent
Yeah.
personality.
Hmm.
So
Totally. Yeah, yeah. Well, something else that I say as I've been talking about the book is I'm just like, listen, you think I wasn't like the number one offender of using Psychobabble like year one of grad school? Like, I
yeah.
think every clinician is, if they're being honest with themselves, because it's exciting and like you're learning about all these things and putting language to stuff that you kind of intuitively knew or observed but couldn't really quite explain. And it's exciting, but then you quickly learn that diagnosis is no joke. I mean, people are diagnosticians in their careers. I'm more of an interventionist myself, but I know enough about diagnosis to know how much I don't know, you know?
Yeah.
Or yeah, so sometimes I like to think of my book and like the spirit of my content. It's like, okay, you've taken Psych 101, like you've heard about, OCD, but let's actually talk a little bit more about like what it is and what it isn't in Psych 102.
Oh,
Like one or two.
yeah. Like you like being organized. You don't have
Mm,
OCD. Like that's not what
yeah,
OCD is.
totally. Well, one of the, I was just talking about it earlier. I'm such a big, like personality theory and science nerd. And sometimes, I don't know how y'all feel, but sometimes I feel like it was something that I wish it got included a little bit more in my education because that was something, it was more of like an independent study type interest because so much of what, comes through into the office, I think it's a worthwhile what word am I looking for? Um, it's a worthwhile competency to be able to separate. It's like, well, are you a people pleaser or are you highly agreeable? Because helping someone who's highly agreeable, you if they're extremely agreeable, like you do want them to have the skills and the competency to be able to negotiate and stuff like that. But encouraging them to, side with themselves all the time because that's quote unquote healthy, like that's going to stress their nervous system out. Like some of that
Mm,
is biological. Like I'm not a big fan of that. And I think that's sometimes where some of the confusion occurs, where it's like, is this like pathology, or is this just like normal human variance?
I love
mm,
that. I saw one of your posts recently about that, and I think I think the conversation about people pleasing is huge right now. And sometimes I'm like, wait, some of this is just like having empathy for people. Like some of this is
Totally.
just compassion. And like, do we need to quote unquote fix all of this? Like,
Right.
that's going to create a just more selfish
Yeah.
society, right?
Totally. Well, here's what. So we can talk about two birds, one stone. I'm going to talk about people pleasing. I also want to talk about love bombing a little
Ooh,
bit. And so
yeah.
this is one I've been personally getting fired up by because I recently started seeing someone very seriously. We're very much in love, and it happened relatively quickly. And
Mhm.
of course, our eyes were wide open at the beginning of that process because we didn't know quite what was going on. But you know the feedback I got from every single one of my loved ones, some of them are clinicians, some of them are not, was always just kind of like, oh, like I'm so excited for you. Like, more at the beginning, it was like kind of like, oh, like I hope this lasts. Not
mm,
that, and the vibe wasn't like, oh, well, this is definitely like problematic, right? People were hopeful to hear about the story, maybe even a little envious, right? If they're, or whatever it is. And so part of me is just like all these people that are, propagating this idea. It's like, well, to go one pace is slow and another pace to go To go one pace is unhealthy and another pace is very, very healthy. I just think it's just an attempt to try to have more control over the journey of love than any of us really have.
Mhm.
And I don't want to sound nihilistic about it because I think that psychology, of course, is really able to kind of illuminate a lot in that department for us. But again, I think it's all about, person, context, fit. I'm a very instinctual, intuitive creature, if you will, in my personality and just who I am. So it makes sense to me, that I hit it off with someone very, very fast. For like, if you think about like the Myers-Briggs distinction of like, the sensing versus kind of like the intuitive versus other people, they might want to take their time. Both are good. You know, some people meet and they get married less than a year later and they're together for decades to come. And some people really take their time and they get divorced like a year or two into marriage. There just isn't a blueprint. And so I think that in this relationship, one of the things that I've been very present to is just how good it feels to feel called to change yourself a little bit, like not the core of who you are, like not in a deceptive way, but to like the invitation of like, oh, like I need to be a better partner, a better man. I need to take care of myself a little bit better, or I need to show up for you a little differently. That's incredibly rewarding,
Yeah.
and I think that kind of gets lost in all of this, like very, I would argue, like toxically, like individualistic, like don't people please, don't love bomb. Meanwhile, we're all complaining about narcissists like they're everywhere. Like it's kind of a funny, like
Yeah.
paradox. Like it's like what? And
Right.
so,
Well, yeah, we like to have like victim perpetrator,
mm,
nuance is hard. Nuance is hard to sit with. So when we can label someone as something, it makes it like gets rid of our cognitive dissonance. We're just like, okay, we're gonna write that person off. That's great. Now I can rest easy.
mm.
Well, can you tell us a little bit more about why this is not helpful for the person who is either labeling themselves as something or labeling someone else as something?
Well, I think that one of the things that I tell people is if you can describe it without psychological jargon, try that and see how helpful it is. And
Um,
this is something I've learned the hard way as a therapist. I don't know if either of you can relate. Are you both practicing clinicians? I don't know if I asked.
I am.
Okay, you are. So one of
I'm
the
not.
things that really surprised me about becoming a therapist is I always thought it was going to be the really like deep analysis that would cause like a corrective emotional experience or a catharsis or a breakthrough. But it's often like just the very simple reflection of like it's like, oh, you sound like you were kind of spoiled growing up. Just like the honesty that can usually be simultaneously devastating but really enlightening for people to hear because people aren't being honest with them in their lives, or people, they want to be polite and they don't want to hurt feelings, but in the safety of the therapeutic container you can be super honest and it's not as scary, right? And so sometimes my whole thing is, well, if are they love bombing, or are they neurodivergent and they're hyperfixating or hyperfocusing on you? I guess that's maybe not the best example because that's also kind of a subclinical term, but people are lustful. They're lonely and want to indulge the fantasy. I don't think these are necessarily psychological interpretations. I just think if you can keep it simple, I think that is often going to help people a lot more. For example, in dating, people love, this one drives me absolutely nuts. People like to use attachment styles to interpret like early stages of dating. It's like
Oh,
they're not attached to you yet. I mean, maybe they are. Maybe they fell really quickly and it manifests kind of right away. But in my clinical experience, people will be like a year into a relationship and they come in and they're engaging in all these weird behaviors and they don't know why. And it's kind of like, oh, like, well, this is very standard of avoidant attachment, or, you're feeling more anxious because now it feels very real. You're like in this for real, not just the idea of this. And it's not helpful to be sitting there wondering why the guy that ghosted you, thinking it's like, oh, well, I learned this one thing about his family and he's definitely avoidantly attached. It's like, I'm so sorry to be the one to tell you this, but he's avoiding intimacy with you. That is not the same thing as being avoidantly attached,
yes.
nor
Yes.
is being avoidantly attached the same thing as being an avoidant person. Like some people, that's
Mhm.
just kind of how they cope. They like to avoid. They like to
Yeah.
avoid things. And so I just don't know if it's helping us. I think we're spending all of our energy in like the wrong places.
I
So do you
love
feel like
that.
it's taking us further away from being able to hold nuance?
I think it's taking us further away from being able to hold nuance, but I also think that a lot of people resort to using psychobabble because they really want their experience to be validated, to be
Ah,
seen, to be
yeah.
understood. And maybe there was like a few months where using this language had that effect on people, but it's become so ubiquitous and overused and watered down that now if someone discloses, that they're a survivor of narcissistic abuse, a lot of us kind of raise an eyebrow. It's kind of like, which I think is so unfair to all of the survivors of narcissistic
Yeah.
abuse, which is incredibly damaging, and
Mhm.
very tedious to treat from the clinical perspective of things. Um, and so I think that's the other thing that's happening. I think it's making it harder for people to hear each other. Because then
Mm.
people start getting into like, well, what isn't psychopathology, or like, are they exaggerating? Is this like a power thing? Is this an appeal to authority thing?
Mhm.
Are you just having like a dramatic moment and we're going to let you have that versus, I don't know. I would say for anyone listening, if you have like a loved one who disclosed they've been dealing with depression, just as an example, um, that's amazing that they feel safe enough to open up to you and trust you. But I think that they don't have to be experiencing major depressive disorder for them to be able to be like, I've been feeling super unmotivated lately, or I've just been feeling super bland, I've been feeling super apathetic, or I've just been feeling down in the dumps about this or that. That is still super vulnerable and like worthy of not just your friendship's attention, but even a therapist's attention. Like a therapist can certainly help with that, but I don't think that necessarily constitutes like I'm depressed, or I have depression.
Mm.
I feel like the labels are almost antidoting the dynamic spectrum of self, where
Mm,
instead of I am a human being and I am experiencing these thoughts, feelings, and sensations that may change depending on my environment, that suddenly I am
right.
lupus, I am ADHD, I am a
Hmm.
victim of
Right.
abuse, whatever, I have trauma, like whatever that is. It's we're no longer a
Yeah.
dynamic. And I feel like the medical system by and large has propagated this like very siloed opinion. And I think you're out there kind of debunking some of that. Like we got all this language, we have this DSM, and it's like, do you fit these check boxes? But the research shows that we're dynamic humans and we're on a
Yeah.
spectrum of many experiences.
Mhm. Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes I think people think that I'm like this like DSM hardliner or something. I don't even diagnose people in my practice. Like I don't unless it's clinically appropriate. I don't accept insurance. Like I'm like this is actually like isn't like I am a huge fan of the dimensionality. I just want to include that, a big part of that dimension like is not even it's not clinical. It's not even like it's non-diagnostic, it's subclinical.
Mhm.
Here's a perfect example of that. I would love to know what you think about this because you just brought up trauma. Um, my stance on trauma is a bold one, and I'm willing to be proved wrong as the years kind of go on. But I think that as a community, we're going to look back on this era and cringe a little bit. I really do. I think this idea that everybody has it, everything can get traced back to it. Any psychogenic event that creates an ongoing response, is trauma. I think it's become way too watered down. And what I like to share is I talk about losing my dad unexpectedly
Mhm.
when I was 11. Certainly developed trauma responses to that. Received lots of therapy for it, but I also experienced grief. And
Mhm.
grief is something that I believe is cumulative. It affects you over the course of a lifetime. And in the book, I write about how a family member had a health scare actually while I was writing the book, and they're absolutely fine now. But as you can imagine, after losing my dad unexpectedly, my family system is a little sensitive to people getting
Mhm.
sick or to people, anything like that. And so, we were all just like messes that day. I'm trying to figure out, what was going on the phone, and I remember talking to my therapist at the time, and he said something very interesting to me. He said, oh Joe, like I'm so sorry this happened and I'm so glad that they're going to be okay. But what a gift for all of this grief to come up so you can integrate it, so you can process it. And I was so annoyed when he said that, because I
Yeah.
don't like feeling, unpleasant emotion, personally. But I also get what he was pointing to, particularly for me. And, it's helping me sit in negative affect, like I alluded to earlier. It's something that I'm always kind of working on. And I can't imagine ever saying that to a survivor of trauma whose
Mhm.
PTSD gets activated after years of being in remission. Like, I just don't think many therapists would. And I think it's because it's a different thing, you know?
Mhm.
And it's okay to have different labels for all these different things, even though they can be very hard and very tragic and
Mhm.
make life really difficult.
What word do you use instead? So I use in my book, I talk about it as an adaptive event. And
Mm,
so we adapt for in ways that are useful, in ways that are temporarily useful, or ways that are not useful. So
yeah.
instead of using the language of trauma, do you have an alternative?
I think it depends on it's hard to answer that abstractly.
Mhm.
I'll probably I haven't used that exact verbiage that you just offered, but it would probably be like something similar, like something
Yeah.
that's more just kind of value neutral.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm often, concerned about with all this trauma discourse is when we start describing things as inherently traumatic, we lose sight of the fact that, well, trauma is about our present moment relationship to the past.
Mhm.
It's not actually about what happened
Yeah.
back then. And I think that's a super key distinction because without that, then actually a lot of the other really valuable nuances around like, trauma research kind of gets lost at the wayside. Like everything
Yeah.
from like little T traumas, to versus big T to just the subjective nature of the trauma responses. Like all of that is so true and so important. But I think when we start talking about just saying like, well, that was traumatic. I'm a big fan. I don't know if I have it accessible. Oh, yes, I do. Um, are you familiar with this guy? It's George Bonanno, I think is his name. He wrote this book. It's called The End of Trauma. Um,
Mm.
so he's based at Columbia and he studied first responders on 9/11 and afterwards when it happened here in New York. And one of the things that he noticed was that like some of the symptoms you could conceptualize as acute stress disorder, but something really big just happened. This is actually just like a normal response, and
Yeah.
resilience was the norm.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
percentage of people that developed something like acute stress disorder, PTSD, was actually much smaller than I think modern day discourse would have you believe. And I think from a media perspective, I think that's super important for the culture to kind of normalize and empower the idea of resiliency and empower people and to empower them that if you're not feeling particularly resilient for a certain event that happened to you, you can get better. Like we know how to treat trauma, which is pretty cool, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
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 I love that. And for those who are watching or listening, it's called The End of Trauma. And we'll make sure that that link is in the notes so you
Oh
can
yeah.
grab it. Thank
Yeah.
you for that. Yeah.
Mm.
So
So-
maybe we have time for like maybe two more myths. And so
Okay.
yeah.
do you
Yeah.
have any favorites or maybe something that you haven't gotten to talk about as much in your interviews? Because I know everyone's
Um,
interviewing you right now.
yeah, let me think. Um, we've covered a lot today. Um,
Truly.
well, here's one, and I would love y'all's perspective on it. In a couple of different myths, I touch on this. I guess you could almost call it like a debate in the mental health field about, this idea of kind of like systemic responsibility for our mental health versus kind of individual empowerment.
Yeah.
And what I talk about in the book, and I don't think I'm very, I don't think this is a novel point of view by any means, but I talk about how it's like, well, I think it's really important to have a balance.
Yeah.
That there's going to be some people that are being too hard on themselves for life's shortcomings, and then talking about kind of systemic realities can be super curative. And then there's going to be some people who like need to be empowered to get through whatever it is that they're getting through. Circumstances be damned, and sometimes some people need both. At the same time. Um, but I know that it's one that people get a little sensitive about, and I completely understand why. But I also am cognizant of the fact that I think a lot of big brands out there, like kind of mental health or self-help brands that are too kind of systemically oriented, I think they really run the risk of encouraging a victim mindset that I don't think is particularly healthy. And I think the literature supports me in that assertion.
Mm.
But I'm just kind of wondering what you two think, or if this is something you have a strong opinion on.
I have a person in my life and they're 17. And one of the things that I've noticed is you made me feel this way. You need to change
Mm,
your behavior because you are making me angry or triggered or you need to change the way you talk to me. And so I've been kind of noticing that. I've been noticing that in this relationship with this little person, and then having conversations with other clinicians. And I'm seeing a lot of that kind of language coming out, which is super different than when I was being raised. It was like,
Mm.
Nicole, you're responsible for how you feel. We're not taking any accountability. And I'm seeing this pendulum swing. What are you seeing,
Yeah.
Hads?
It's the same. Yeah, for sure. Where like, there were some experiences for me as a kid that were pretty invalidating because it was like, only you have control over how you feel. Like, I am not going to take any responsibility for that at all. But now I very much see the pendulum having swung the other direction. And I think, I think we have to, I think it'll eventually come more to the middle. I think it was pretty extreme. And then even like people who are into like personal development and like psychology and stuff, were over there on the like, you can control yourself. And now, yeah, it's the other way, but I think it'll go back to the middle, hopefully.
Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of in the I'm forgetting exactly the title of the myth. I think it's myth number 3. I think it's expressing your feelings is always valid or something like that. And
Mhm.
one of the things I talk about, I tell a story of someone that had started to date and really liked, and one day their read receipts turn on, but they're not replying to me right away. And so naturally, I'm kind of like, well, WTF? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I thought we had a nice vibe going. And of course, I had feelings about it, feelings that I chose not to express, not to put too much stock in, even though that was an exercise, let's say,
Yeah.
at the time. And when I eventually did talk to them about it, they had bought the new iPhone, or they'd just gotten a new phone. Maybe a new iPhone didn't come out, and the setting was just automatically there. And so they didn't
Mhm.
even know that they were leaving everybody on red. And so had I, made them responsible for my feelings, or had I felt like, well, the emotional healthy thing to do is to always express, which I think is a total Freudian fantasy. Um, like,
Yes.
I think that would have, I mean, the relationship didn't, last for other reasons, but I think that would have totally been on me. And how embarrassing, for a mental health professional to have kind of conducted themselves that way in their personal life. And so
Mhm.
it hasn't, what's her name? Isn't like Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett or something? It's like How
I don't
Emotions
know.
Work or something is her book. Like the main metaphor is being like sometimes your nervous system is just taking guesses, based on the
Ugh.
data that you have. And she's really
Mm.
has substantiated that idea. And that's what I hope to normalize with this chapter. This is data in your nervous system. And you can do lots of things with the data. You can crunch the numbers in a bunch of different ways. I think that for those listening, the reason why your therapist is always validating your feelings is a lot of times your depression, your anxiety, your eating disorder, it's associated with emotional suppression. So of course we want you to feel like we want you to feel better. That is very different from saying like, well, the emotionally intelligent thing to do is to feel and express all the
Mhm.
time. That's a recipe for burnout, if you ask me.
Oh,
Yeah, I was just talking about this with my husband actually, where I live in San Diego. This is rampant in like psychobabble is so rampant here. And like, I love living here. There's so many amazing things about it. And um I do think that there's this zeitgeist right now that is like, when I feel something, I have to address it with a friend.
mm,
And I'm like, sometimes you just gotta move through it yourself. Like, it's not something that you need to address every time. Like, that's gonna strain the relationship just as
Mhm.
much as never, ever, ever bringing anything up ever. That it will strain it, or perhaps more sometimes, if you're bringing
Yeah.
up every single gripe that you have.
that
Hmm.
happened to me today.
Really?
My partner is a verbal processor, and so when there's like a feeling, it just
Mm.
comes out through the mouth. and
Yeah.
and the feeling that this person was having was like, those are like my buttons and my big
Mhm.
anxieties, and they were just saying the thing, and then I was like, and
Mm,
it wasn't fun. So ideally they would have just like kept it to themselves.
yeah,
But
totally.
but also my transcendental meditation therapist years ago, because I would meditate and I'd be like, oh my gosh, Charles, I'm having all these thoughts and realizations and discoveries. And he's like, none of it matters.
Mm,
He's like, it's
That's
just
great.
energy being released. And so it's kind of like what you said is how emotions work is it's just energy is being released by the body and our brain is kind of guessing based on context
mm,
clues.
Yeah.
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 And that's such a lovely distinction because I'm a verbal extroverted processor. And so but not everyone is.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something else that maybe the field as a whole will like overlook because so much of it is like, name the feeling, like on the feeling wheel, like share versus, once I was treating I mean it's such like a basic example in some ways, but like once I was treating like an adolescent boy and it was just like that was actually not like what they needed. They needed to channel it into sports, just like as basic as it sounds. And it
Mm.
was it was the correct intervention,
Mhm.
because again, it was like the context fit with the individual.
Yeah.
They were able to be more adaptive that way. And so it's a funny stance for me to take because it's just like I'm a verbal processor. Like I love putting language to all the things, just for fun sometimes. But yeah, I don't know if that's what everybody needs. And I'm a big fan of the
Yeah.
somatic approaches in research. I think it's all really exciting.
I was
Oh,
going to
yeah.
ask you that, like your level of curiosity with the body, like overly curious or underly curious or
Yeah.
just right.
It's something that I personally experienced like as a patient,
Yeah.
even before I went to grad school. So I've always had a very open mind about it. And I've seen wonderful results with it where people, some people, achieve symptom relief just from the talking or from the corrective emotional experience or the cognitive restructuring. But then some people, it's kind of like, all right, it's still persisting. Like let's try this. And it is usually the last stop on the tracks for
Yeah.
me, and it usually does the trick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so good. I love it. And I do want to say, like, I just want to out myself here where all of the things that we're talking about, I've done all of the things. So,
Yeah.
like, like I have labeled other people. I have, there's no like right way here. And I think this conversation is so incredibly important because we can get self-righteous in
Yeah.
whatever field we're in, and especially in like psychology and stuff where we're like this is the right way so I think the nuance conversation is so important, so thank you for bringing that into the world.
Well, of course, you're very welcome.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So as we finish up here, is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you want to make sure that is shared?
Um, Here's something. So sometimes people ask, I'm aware that there's so much misinformation out there, so much psychobabble. Like, how do I navigate it? Like outside of like, following me, or there's other creators that like to call this stuff out as well, who are all really great. Um, and you could follow us. You could, I definitely like I'm consider looking at my book, but the number one thing that I tell people to do is to remember have you ever heard this? It's like a conditional logic exercise. And so it goes, if it's a dog, it's always a mammal. But if it's a mammal, it's not always a dog, right? So if they're a
Mm.
narcissist, they're always going to be self centered. But if they're being self centered, they're not always a narcissist. And so just like checking in whether, and this isn't even something just for mental health. I think it's for really anything that you see on social media or in research or whatever it is. It's just a way to more carefully think about all the stuff that's going on out there. And you can do it with pretty much any term, any concept, and just kind of check in with yourself before you accidentally misapply like a label or a framework.
Yeah,
Oh, that was really
that's
good. If I
perfect.
wasn't afraid of breaking my mic, I would have dropped it.
Oh.
It was very expensive. So
Oh,
amazing. So how can people find you? Tell us about your online presence, your book.
Sure. So my name is Joe Nucci. That's N as in Nancy, UCCI. JoeNucciTherapy.com has all the links to socials. That's also my handle, Joe Nucci Therapy. And my book is Psychobabble, published with Harper, is available wherever you buy books, and you can listen to it on any of the audiobook platforms, including Spotify.
That's amazing. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for being here. This has been such a great conversation. I'm going to
Oh,
listen to
good.
it again and again and
Yeah.
love your book.
Okay. Thank you
Yeah,
so
thank
much.
you.
Yay. All right, everyone. So thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.